Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 706 podcast, where we collectively decide which movies are the 706 greatest movies of all time. I'm your host for this week, Kirk. I'm accompanied by my three co-hosts. Why don't we go around and you can say hi in this order. Connor, Tony, and Anthony.
Hello.
Hi, guys. I'm Tony.
Anthony.
Okay.
I'm Connor. I forgot to say I'm Connor.
We've determined that my co-hosts are capable of following simple tasks. They
I failed.
all have a basic level of cognizance. So, folks, we're here to discuss the 2004 film, Der Untergang, or, as we say in the winner's language, Downfall. This is a movie about a little-known dictator named Adolf Hitler. It's written by Bernd Eichinger, Joachim Fest, directed by Oliver Hirschbiegel, and it basically chronicles the final few days of Hitler's life in late April 1945 as the war is coming to a close, at least on the Western Front. And we're treated to an intimate look at Hitler's kind of milieu, his environment, his ecosphere. He has all these diplomats, advisors, generals that are kind of these fawning sycophants that are allowing him to continue this delusion that the war is not yet lost. Meanwhile, we're given shots of the Battle of Berlin, what's actually happening above ground in reality, as the Russians are encircling the city and basically stomping over the remaining Nazi forces on the Eastern Front. So kind of juxtaposes those two views pretty steadily throughout the film. And yeah, it's a foreign language film. It's in German. It's made and produced by Germans, or at least German-speaking people. I don't want to say Germans explicitly because Bruno Ganz, the lead actor who plays Hitler, is actually Swiss. So I haven't checked into the history of the production team, but it's a very intimate look at what is kind of an unconscionable and, or actually a very predictable end to an unconscionable debacle in the Second World War and National Socialism under Adolf Hitler. So why don't we go around, give some initial impressions. I'm fairly certain all three of you have seen this movie before, maybe not Anthony. Have you seen this, Anthony?
No.
Okay. So, I'm sure the other two have.
No, I've never seen this movie.
Wait, you're lying.
No, I've never seen it. Never seen it.
Okay. That must have been, okay. Only one of my co-hosts has seen this, and that's actually the German-speaking Connor. Let's start off with your impressions, Connor. First off, I want to know, would you be able to watch this movie without subtitles and still, be able to tell, who Hitler is and, what's going on? And would you get the general gist of it, or?
I have to say, my German suffered a little bit over the years. I haven't spoken it that much, but so there are definitely some things I would have missed, I think, if I didn't have subtitles on. I tried to see if I could watch without subtitles, but there was no setting for that on Amazon Prime or whatever, so I did just watch it with the English subtitles. When I had them to compare, I understood, all the German. There were some things here and there that I had trouble catching, but but it was interesting watching it, right? Because the first time I watched it, I didn't know any German, and watching it this time, knowing German, it was just a very different experience.
So what do you think of the film itself, though? Of the drama?
It's a great cast of lovable characters. A rather disappointing ending, of course, but with some, notes of hope. No, of course, I could do this all day. This movie is, of course, ripe for some inappropriate humor, right? Simply because we're dealing with, the most evil regime, or so we would think, and certainly to the modern memory, right, the most evil regime in history and the most evil people in history. I found myself wondering as I was watching it, kind of knowing the story better and having since I first watched it seen more treatments of kind of the fall of Berlin or like the very last days of the Nazi regime. I found it a little bit lacking. I found it a little bit monotone. I mean, how much could you do, right? You're stuck with this one scenario and with predictable results, right? Things are going to get worse and worse. People are going to commit suicide, right? They're going to blame each other and engage in all this recrimination. So there's not much you can do. There's not much surprise or development that you can really see. And I think what the movie tries to do is it tries to balance, right, the central story of the way the Nazi top brass kind of turns on each other and everything kind of implodes, which I think is the most interesting thing, obviously, to witness, from a human standpoint, with also these kind of subplots. For instance, a very important character who sort of bookends the film is Frau Junge. I forget her full name, or Fräulein Junge at the time, who is a secretary, right, who works with Hitler and is weirdly a kind of like almost a point of view character, a kind of everyman. And also we have the character of a sort of, again, a kind of a reasonable, and kind of humanitarian type who is our, I think it's Dr. Gadowitz or something like that.
Oh, no.
Who is this doctor character who we kind of follow, who's mostly disconnected from all of the events in the bunker. And I find myself I see what they're trying to do to try to vary the thing, but I just was not interested in either of these two characters. And I thought they were kind of a necessary distraction from the central point, which is kind of the almost, right, kind of Shakespearean development, right, and the fall of these characters, right, of these figures, who are all very different, right. Of the Nazi top brass, I mean, Goebbels and the like, right? So, yeah, I found that it was a little too long, right, that it engaged a little bit too much, right? I think it was cool that it integrated, both what happens in the bunker and what's happening outside. And I thought that was portrayed with much, pathos and very well done filmmaking. But, I found that ultimately it kind of dragged, even when you were considering, right, the kind of the most interesting bit, which is, of course, right, what these different characters do in this situation of being faced with the end of their, rule, so yeah, I felt a little bit monotone overall, but still, I mean, it had many things that were good about it. It's a very well executed movie, and Bruno Ganz's performance is, obviously legendary.
Yeah, well said. All right. Let's go to Anthony. Anthony, why don't you take us through your cursory opinions or impressions?
Sure. So let me also default to Connor probably quite often to get the pronunciations right. Otherwise, I'm sure I'm just gonna, ruin them completely. But I think
live for this shit. Yeah, let's do it.
Exactly.
Hitler.
Yeah, that's what the Hitler degree was for. But I think Connor was onto something there, at least in the way like I kind of was thinking about it. I think part of the way we have, or at least for me, I think about the movie and think about how good or how interesting it is depends on what kind of framework I'm thinking about the movie sort of falls under. If I'm thinking about the movie as a sort of historical document or historical representation, it's obviously sort of excellent and well done. I think Bruno Ganz and all the others have these kind of almost thankless tasks, impossible tasks to overcome in portraying Hitler, which is how do you portray him humanistically and not like necessarily in the positivist sense that we're usually attributing to that word, but how do you kind of give a sort of person who's drowned in humor, drowned in kind of this mythology of evil, some sort of like human grounding? And I think he fully succeeds. I think it's brilliant in the way that we see him post kind of charismatically, whereas we see how much he's changed these people and how much, especially towards the end, they're telling him not to give up, that like they'll follow the Führer to the end. Like we see the kind of weight there, and I think it's really well done. But as a movie itself, there are times when I feel it kind of falters, particularly when it actually leaves in the first half away from the Nazis, and we're left in kind of the war scene with like the boy and stuff like that. At times like that, while probably true and stuff, I don't know how interesting it is on a sort of movie level, at least to me. While I'd also say the most interesting things are actually when we see the secretary and Eva Braun talk which is where the movie almost seems to come alive and is sort of offering a perspective that's not usually there in a way that I found really interesting, which is seeing a side to the bunker that's not usually talked about.
Right, the human side, the in quotes, I guess, it depends on, it's all relative, of course, but less so the Darwinistic, ramblings about natural order and all that
Yeah.
in quotes. Yeah, it's that's a good point. They do provide some contrast there. I think perhaps the point that the reason that those moments outside with the doctor, they feel kind of like shoehorned in, I think, is because they were there to kind of generate some pathos, like Connor had said. Like, they didn't want people to think that they were merely like glorifying Nazis or I don't know. There seemed to be an element there. I know obviously we're allowed to consume art about bad people, but they didn't want people to think that this naive secretary was supposed to be their moral compass for the film, perhaps, because she even indicts herself in these true, real interviews that bookend the film. She says being young was not an excuse. But yeah, let's go ahead to Tony. We'll have more conversations on this, but let's go ahead to Tony.
Yeah, I had kind of mixed feelings about it, kind of similar to Connor, because Connor's central criticism, I think I basically agree with, just the idea that just inherently, in terms of drama, there's only so much you can really wring out of this particular story, right? Like, there isn't really a serious progression. It's basically like, the idea is like, yeah, there's like 4 different scenes of someone coming up to Hitler with like a clipboard and saying, yeah, all our soldiers are dead, all the buildings are on fire, and half the people in this bunker have killed themselves. And Hitler's like, well, just have them attack. And then they're like, they can't. And then he goes, ugh. And that happens like 4 times. Like, they come to Hitler saying, yeah, we've really actually lost this time. Like, we're really actually fucked. And he's like, oh. Like, that happens a bunch of times. And I'm not saying that's like bad or wrong. Like, that's an accurate representation of the history, right? I'm just saying that in a 2.5-hour movie, that gets a little bit tiresome. And I think we were like halfway through it. I'm just kind of like, okay, is this going to surprise me? Is there going to be anything in this movie that really like takes me back or like goes makes me go like, wow, like this is such an interesting perspective. It sounds very negative when I put it all out like that. However, I am genuinely ambivalent about this movie because I think that it does have an ambition and sort of like, I admire this movie. I admire that it was made because I think that it is important that we have a movie, like a well done, serious movie about this topic. I do think that that's something that should be accessible and that people should be able to watch and see, and to make it tangible in this way and to have it dramatized so well. I think that is valuable historically. And I think that there is something extremely bold about some of the choices it makes, which seem banal on the surface, but when you kind of think about their implications, are kind of impressive. Like, so this movie is essentially a war movie. We've got our protagonists, who are the Nazis in this film, and then we have our antagonists, who are the Soviets. And we are with the Nazis the entire time, right? And like in most war movies, you have a variety of different characters. You have the delusional general, the delusional leader who can't see that it's over. You have the kind-hearted doctor, or kind-hearted in quotes, right? The guy who wants to like help people who are still loyal to Germany. And then you have like the cowards that want to give up. And then you have the wife who just wants to support her. You have these like types of characters, and it creates kind of a moral universe within the film of people with like different values, different perspectives. But the thing is, because we are in that bunker, not the whole movie, we see outside it, but we are with the Nazis the whole movie. There are no Soviet characters. There are no American characters. There are no Allied characters in this movie. They're just a faceless, nameless like threat that's encroaching upon us. So it puts us in the shoes of the Nazis. And obviously there are films and TV shows and books about anti-heroes. Obviously there's countless examples in art, in narrative art, where we are made to empathize with a person who does morally bad things. That in itself is not all that bold or all that crazy. What makes this movie kind of bold is like, we are not given an out. Every character we could possibly empathize with, every character we could possibly connect to in a human level is a Nazi. And that's like kind of like a crazy thing. Like, it sounds very banal, they made a movie about the Nazis, but when you actually think about that and you're actually watching it, and you're trying to process it as a story, what stories do is they generate empathy. They allow us to connect with characters. They allow our human psychology to interact with another human psychology or put ourselves into someone else's shoes. So to serve this up and to not give us a character who's not a Nazi forces us to empathize with the Nazis by definition, just like there's no way around it. And there's something about that is very kind of provocative, or that is kind of like, I admire kind of the commitment to that, and the lack of, there's just the focus of focusing on this particular very narrow historical window, right? And I think that empathy the movie generates is sort of, there is something kind of meaningful about it, and that it makes us question, what historical moment am I trapped in? What would I be blind to this? If I was here, if I was in that bunker, if I was born in this time, in this place, how would I feel about these things? And it's a disconcerting question because we don't know. It's a counterfactual. You can never know. You can never know how you would have felt. There's the young girl crying about how much she loves Hitler and just don't give up, don't give up. And, and I think that is the purpose of the secretary character. Although I agree that she's not the most well-realized, she's not the most tangible or like interesting character. She's more like a pair of eyes for us to see through. I did like the various moments of solitude these different characters are given, because basically what we're presented with is like, we know it's called Downfall, so we know it's ending. We know that everything's falling apart. And it's, how do you deal with the knowledge that it's all falling apart, that history is passing you by, and maybe the faint knowledge that you will be seen as a demon? What do you do with that information? And we get these moments, the people have to play things up for Hitler. They have to appease Hitler because he's their leader. And then they have the moments of solitude, the moments of quiet where they're by themselves and they just react. There are scenes of characters just sitting and reacting to things, or reacting to really bad news they just got, where the mask kind of slips, or characters watching other characters. Like one of the most chilling scenes in the movie is where I'm not going to even try to remember anyone's name other than Hitler's. Sorry. There's this scene where the doctor is walking out in the hallway and he overhears Hitler talking to someone else about like the best way to commit suicide. And it's very clear what they're talking about. And it's very like unsettling. And he's just like, ugh, like Jesus, like I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to know about that. It's like, how do you go on with your day having heard that? And that's sort of what it is. Like, how to be one of these people, how would you just go on with your day? How would you just go on with your life after this chapter in history is over? That's why, is it Goebbels' wife kills their children?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, there is no future, she says. There's no future in the sense, there's no future in which I am not the devil. There's no future in which I am not executed for crimes against humanity. So I would rather die on my own terms here, because there is no future. There is no going forward after this. There is no moving on after you've done the Holocaust. It's over. You're the devil. And my favorite line in the whole movie is shortly before he kills himself, he says, "Tomorrow I'll be cursed by millions, but that's how it is." He just says like, yeah, like I'm Hitler. Like I'm gonna be Hitler. Like I guess that's what it is. This is a zombie movie. It's dead. The soul is dead. The spirit is dead. The brain is dead, but the body lurches on. And I think that's brilliantly handled in the way Hitler dies with 40 minutes left in the movie. I was like, oh my God, Hitler's dead. There's like 40 minutes left. But the movie just kind of keeps lurching on, and we know Hitler's dead and we know it's over. And these characters just have to like keep going, I guess, but why or not? And I think there is something interesting about that. So yeah, that was kind of my ambivalent takeaway.
Fair enough. All right. Thank you all for, I'll just give a brief kind of understanding of my take. I think this movie's excellent. I guess I impart my own drama, I into the film. I imbue it with the historical drama that certainly exists, and I contrast it to the unimaginable highs that came so quickly for the Nazi Party in the 30s, and how they were storming the world. They were storming Prussia, and then they were storming Europe, and then they were storming the world almost. Granted, once past France, there wasn't much left. It's obviously a tried story that we all kind of understand, but to me, I see these people who have done so much, who have committed so much evil and they're at the kind of the point of reckoning in their lives. And it's like, are they going to turn inward? Are they just kind of going to throw their hands up in recognition that hopefully I don't have to deal with this because there's an internal peace that's waiting for me, as Hitler says, rather optimistically. If I were Hitler, there'd be a part of me that would be very scared of hell. I'll just say that. Like, if those God-loving people that I, exterminated were at all right, I am so fucked. I'm going to get ass fucked by like 10 demons. But anyways, the other part that fascinates me is how much death is present throughout the movie. It's like the first modern day scene the first scene that's situated in 1945 is on Hitler's birthday, right? April 20th, 1945. So this all occurs in the matter of a week and a half. And yeah, it's that thing that is coming, but that only serves to heighten the tension for me. And it's a subject that really does fascinate me, and the idea of the social politics of it all, how this regime was created and supported so zealously by the German people, at least once they started accruing, military victories and the social programs started to, lower unemployment. And this was all really born out of, like, they mention it a bunch of times, but like November 1918, like, that's what people, they were sick of furrowing their brows and looking in solemn contemplation towards their transgressions of the past. They wanted to make Germany great again. Hey, what about that? They didn't want to feel contrition for anything anymore. They were sick of it. And so this was their way of moving forward and kind of leaving their ghosts behind. But little did they know they were carrying them with them all along. So I have follow-up questions for everybody here. Let's start with Connor. Connor, you're a fairly fluent German speaker. You know a lot about German history and culture. You obviously know about World War II. What do you think? Do you think this movie would have benefited from showing some of those highs a little bit more to create a little more contrast? What could have elevated this movie out of the realm of monotonous for you?
Sure, that's a really tough question. It would be hard. It would be really hard. I think that is a problem just of the premise itself, right? They tried to avoid the monotony. Maybe monotony is not the right word, or maybe I can't criticize it for that. But it's not something you really had a choice to. Yes, I guess you could do flashbacks of some kind. I think that just might make it just too complicated almost. I admire that it does take place in a limited span of time. We have one kind of flashback, so to speak, or one kind of prologue, right, where it's the secretaries when Fräulein Junge first meets Hitler at the Wolfschanze, right, at his base or his headquarters, right, and first gets the job. Yeah, but that's also just a kind of a nondescript basement type thing, and we don't see any other things. I mean, yeah, I'd be curious to see, but I think you get the sense that this is you get the sense of the perversity and the kind of the decadence, or maybe not decadence exactly, but the just the pathetic state that Hitler and all of his sort of, that there was this attempt at glory, right, that's kind of completely fallen, right, and with his little award ceremonies and him holding forth at the dinner table as he loved to do, right, that's something that he did consistently. So I think you get the sense that it's sufficiently ruined. I'm not sure you would have to go back and look at previous things, but you do wonder about, I think something that's insufficiently explained or gone into, maybe, though this could be lame in its own way to go into this, is, why people followed Hitler, or kind of for the average person, how did they feel beyond, right, the people who were just pure fanatics. And there are plenty of those, even people who maybe didn't believe it in their heart of hearts. They would certainly act, right, fanatically attached, to Hitler, because that was just sort of a, cult of personality that was part of the, mass culture. So it was hard to get around. But I think you get a lot of just moments of just people who are clearly fanatics, right? The movie doesn't really try to delve into their psychology very much. Obviously, it doesn't really respect them. It kind of sees them as kind of being monstrous figures in a way. I mean, maybe not. I mean, but compared to our, so to speak, our reasonable characters, like even Fegelein, who's kind of a coward, and he's kind of the playboy of the Nazi, top brass, who's much more of a self-serving person. I think he comes across as being more reasonable than a lot of these, hyper fatalistic kind of Nazis who are really so ready to kill themselves. I think that's, obviously that's taken as the more cowardly position ultimately, right? To want to kill yourself in the film. Maybe that's could be argued, but anyway, sorry, that was not a very focused answer to your question, Kirk.
No, that I think that was, and I'm curious when you think about, you mentioned decadence and like opulence is a thing, right? Like that Nazis, they had these like almost pseudo spiritual ceremonies with these mounted guards, and it's almost like they were trying to resurrect, the Prussian kings of old in these ceremonies, and so they had a flair for the dramatic, certainly.
Yeah, no, they did.
Wasn't that the essence of fascism, is like romanticizing this past to trying to bring back this world that probably never existed in the first place? But
right.
And the importance of aesthetics, and and I think you definitely get that moment of Hitler, musing over his, these models were so perfect. He's talking to Speer, who ends up being kind of an important character, right? Kind of Hitler's architect, who's also the Ministry of Armaments, is kind of a character in this movie. And there's a moment between him and Speer. He's reminiscing, and this is what Hitler really loved, was like designing these, fantastic cities, that he could rule over, that were pure. It was pure romance. It was never going to be executed in real life,
And the vision of the far future. It was kind of interesting to me how it was never like once we win the war, like if you're going to romanticize or create a sort of fantasy for yourself.
Yeah.
But the fantasy is always 100 years from now, a couple hundred years from now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said in his acceptance speech as chancellor that Germany will never have another revolution for another 1,000 years. And I sound like some Nazi fanatic. It's actually, I'm very fascinated from a historical and sociological perspective. It's very interesting to me. I'm a social worker, so I like to understand group dynamics. I like to understand social politics, and I like to try to understand the idea of unconditional empathizing, and like putting myself in a room with somebody, trying to understand, are they complicit? Like, I agree with Traudl Junge's conclusion that youth is not an excuse, right? How much of this travesty is on the German people? How much of it is on the leaders who constantly use deceit and betrayal? But I wanted to ask Anthony.
Kurt, can I speak to your previous question real quick? Because
Go ahead, Tony.
Just because I had similar quibbles as Connor did. However, I think that like, if they were to make that change, if they were to show the flashbacks or make this a more like a conventional like rise and fall or like life story thing, is like, it would be a fundamentally different movie, not necessarily a better or worse one. It would just be different. And the things that I like about this movie would be sacrificed if they had opted for that. So I don't know what the answer is. I do think though, if they made it slightly shorter, it would go down a little easier for me. You know what I mean? Like, I think that maybe a 2-hour version of this same story would have felt a little less monotonous, a little bit less one note. So that would be my tip or my suggestion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe they didn't need those moments, those humanitarian moments. I mean, we all knew what was going on. Yeah. It's not like, I think maybe more than any movie we've done on this podcast, except for probably the Adam Curtis movie, we all came in with our foreknowledge, with kind of the context that we've accrued throughout our lives, right? Throughout our educations, throughout family learning, cultural learning. And so this movie, we provide
private online studies.
I was going to say Book of Henry. We had the most foreknowledge, for sure.
Well, I'm not, okay.
Forum posts.
No, the piece, like the raison d'etre, if you will, is actually like a morbid fascination, right? Like,
sure.
I think there's something about seeing and studying something that is completely flawed and doomed to failure and inherently horrible. And it's like the bystander reflex, or what is it called when you're gawking, right? Or, when you're driving and you see an accident on the side of the road. It's that same reflex. Anthony, if Adolf is John Lennon, who is Borman? No, I'm kidding. So I just have a very broad question that, like some of my questions, is going to be very impossible to answer. But is the use of the comparison term Nazi as a comparative term, is that useful at all? Is there use in that, or is it just almost a dead term in the sense of like talking about a moral spectrum? Like, do we gain any knowledge from somebody calling somebody else a Nazi? Like, and I'm actually saving the Trump part of this, so I'm more just talking about the idea of like Nazism in common discussions and perhaps even comparative discussions in academia. Like, right. What do we owe it to ourselves to not be so lazy, right? Like, to actually bring up more of the atrocities that have been perpetrated in our own country, right? Like the 2 genocides that have happened in our own country, all of us being Americans, right? My point is, like, do we overlook and do we default to the, like, you know how if people were to say like evil, what comes to mind, right? Adolf Hitler, Nazis. Do we need to, keep them where they are, but also look at the other instances that maybe we can understand a little bit clearer where we are, and that we're not so, I guess, innocent or protected from these horrific events that have happened in the last 200, 300 years. I don't know where I'm going with this, but feel free to try to grasp onto something I said.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, very provoking question. But I mean, I think one way of thinking and answering is to think about the way that not just the word gets used on its own, but the way it's been co-opted or attached to other words, right? Like grammar Nazi, feminazi, and the way those have kind of been attached and sort of interested and kind of put into debate, and very quickly, right, lose all sense of like seriousness to become a sort of joke in and of itself, which is kind of there. I think the other dimension to that question, right, is the role of complicity when we are using it or when we're outside of it. One of the things, to get back to the movie and the way, because Connor was making me think about this, I think one of the things I'm so fascinated, or why I'm so fascinated about the secretary, is for me, she's actually the most kind of empathetic and sympathetic character at the same time, because even though she's sort of the, right-hand person to sort of Hitler, the sort of transcriber of the documents and everything, there's a certain complicity there that I find really interesting, because we don't see, or at least I don't remember, no outright sense of sort of racial or propagandic attitude from her. She's not in the way that she is like, or that other people are that are just so fawning over Hitler or the Nazi ideology, the Nazi regime. What I find sympathetic about her is it seems more than anyone else a normal person doing their job, whose only sense of guilt comes out of retrospection, at least in the way the movie frames it. Someone who claims, once the truth comes into their hands, that, oh, she was complicit in the sense of evil. So I think, for that is the kind of common person attitude, right? All you want to do is do your job, whoever your boss is, and you want to do that performance as well as you can to the end of your ability. I think in that way of thinking about it, I think we could say that we're all sort of complicit, even in our ignorance of the sort of evils going on, even if our own present reality and perspective don't identify them. That the movie, in its grandest kind of idea, wants to sort of offer retrospection and perspective as the sort of solutions, which are kind of, limited in a way. Like you have to be able to present that knowledge to yourself. And also, I mean, a lot of things have to go right morally, historically, for that to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way. I don't know if I answered it, kind of roundabout way of thinking about it.
It's very eloquently said.
Yeah, I think that I just want to touch on Anthony was saying about the secretary character, kind of on that note, because on that thought, like obviously this movie kind of forces us into a position where we're like, empathizing with Hitler, right? But Hitler is also kind of an untouchable character, because most of us have never been in a position where we're leading like all these armies and stuff and all these soldiers. So he's still like at a distance from us, no matter how what the movie does with him. Whereas the secretary is a much more accessible character. Most of us have been in some sort of role like that, where we're listening to someone and just trying to do a good job. And maybe there's things that make us uncomfortable, but we just kind of have to forget about it or compartmentalize or whatever. That's a much more, I think, for the average person, a much more like relatable kind of character. And what's so like, I found the secretary very like annoying. Like I hated her. I found her really like all the times, like every opportunity she's given to like leave and she says no, and like, oh no, I'll stay with you. Or it's like, why would you stay with Hitler? You're gonna die. Like, why do you want to die? You know, obviously she doesn't die, but you know what I mean? It's like why would you know what I mean? But I think part of what I find frustrating about it is that deep like anxiety and fear for me, I think, in watching her, because again, I always wonder like, what would I have done? You know, what things am I ignoring now that are the equivalent to this, you know, if any, you know, or like, what will I, and seeing her at the end of the movie as an old woman express her regret, on the one hand, that's nice. On the other hand, it's like, you missed your shot. You had a shot. You had a window of time where you were in that place. You were in the driver's seat of history. You were witness to this seismic event and had some level of influence, and that's gone, and you will never get it back. And so, yes, now you can say, oh, I feel all bad about it, and that's great. But if you hadn't lost the war, would you have felt bad about it? That's the thing. You can never answer that question. You can never know that. And that's what's so in a way, she was lucky that, you know, they lost the war so she could, like, I don't know, reclaim her soul or reclaim her innocence. But again, that's almost a shallow victory, because again, like, she had a shot, she had that moment. And I think that's the disconcerting thing about that character and about this movie. And that's probably why I'm so mad at her more than her actually being annoying. It's probably more just like, she forces me to confront that in a way that Hitler himself does not really.
My favorite part of the movie is when she's like hanging out with Eva and Eva's like, oh yeah, here's my fur coat. And you realize she's just like the person trying to please the boss's wife. And that, I think, is like one of the most relatable things, though, that she does. You know, it's just like, oh, you can't even just be friends with like this evil person, or you know, you can't just be the worker for this evil person. You got to embed yourself within the whole network that he's around, and it becomes this great like decadent moment too.
My favorite part about that scene is when she's like, sometimes I kick the dog when he's not around, and she just laughs like, ha ha ha, kicking dogs, that's so funny, and I'm just like, what the fuck is wrong?
I think that's funny in and of itself, because it's like something that in other movies would be horrible, but since we're talking about, you know, the Nazi elite, it's kind of like, oh yeah, look at this minor little, it's like, sometimes I bite my nails, right? Like sometimes I kick the dog. Yeah, that's
sometimes I poison my own children. You know?
Yeah. That, you know, that's a gut-wrenching scene, of course. And I guess they're probably, you know, those children, it's not hard to empathize with them because they had absolutely no choice.
Or the dog.
Oh, or the dog. Sucked too, and they killed the dog. I'm like, you can't just let the dog run away. You can't just give him to the Soviets. Like, they're not gonna care. They're not gonna kill the dog.
Dude, Gandhi would be in the mausoleum in Red Square right next to Lenin. You know, if they let him go, that would have happened. All right, so final question. I know I'm dragging a little bit, but I'm just, because Tony's like, well, what am I missing? What now, Tony? What now? Do you see are we missing any signs of kind of an emergent authoritarianism, either in America or abroad?
Oh my God. Is this where we tie this all into current events? Is that where I make the grand connection? You teeing me up like that, Kurt?
Adam Curtis it.
Well,
sir, of course you do. I mean, I think that, like, I don't want to be presentist and say like, oh, right now more than ever. I don't know that that's literally true. I mean, our country obviously has a wonderful legacy of genocide and bloodshed the world over, and I think sometimes people are quick to forget that. Like in the way, you know, the rehabilitation of George W. Bush, for instance, makes me absolutely disgusted, and it also makes me incredibly pessimistic about the future, because it's like, you know, once Trump goes away, you know, which he will sooner or later, whether or not he wins or loses, he'll go away someday. And we can say, oh, that was all a bad dream, and we're all going to move on and do the next. We're all going to be nice now. We're all going to be nice people. But it's like the last guy you said that about, who killed almost 1 million people in Iraq, and he's on Ellen, you know, and it's like, and that to me is disturbing. That's the part of the thing where it makes you feel like you're a crazy person, you know. I don't know. At least if you're me, you know, I'm a person who feels that visceral reaction to that. And like, that's the sort of thing where I think like, man, like, we really do have to like interrogate these things. We really do have to ask ourselves, like, what am I okay with? You know, I mean, I said it last week, I don't think we were recording, but I think it's true, is like every person has a certain amount of evil they have to accept to live in the world. And the question is, what is that threshold for you? And maybe it should be lower. Maybe you're accepting too much evil. I can't get much more specific than that, but I think that these are important questions for sure.
Connor, Anthony, any closing thoughts on the movie? Or
I mean, I wouldn't want to compare Trumpism to Nazism too strongly, but of course there's similarities there. There are points of contact, but I think what's similar, what this movie asks us, or the interesting question it asks us at this moment, right, is assuming, right, Trump is out of power, right, his is like a regime or a style of rule and a kind of political organization that is so reviled by so many other people, right, and obviously kind of strategically accepted by other people, right, sort of cynically, right. Obviously, we're looking at a similar situation, provided he loses now, or when he loses, or if at the end of another term, right. You're looking at this real situation, again, I think almost a similar situation, not, of course, involving bloodshed, but involving, right, like, what do you do after this? What happens to these people after, right, a Trump presidency? Or what happens to the people who stood by Trump, right, in the face of, right, so much, in the face of just against the world, basically, right, or much of the world. You know, I think of, like, the character of what I find interesting, and another thing I just wanted to mention, just by the way, character that made me uncomfortable, another kind of character who, like our secretary, is a kind of character who is supposed to, I think, inspire or invite a little bit of our sympathy, is the character of Albert Speer, who I mentioned is the sort of architect. And he kind of comes off in this film as being a much more reasonable person who tells Hitler to leave Berlin, or, well, I guess he's not reasonable in that sense. I guess he's kind of a, we wouldn't want Hitler to survive, but, and generally a person who seems to have stood up to Hitler and is not going to go along with his insane plans to basically let the country be ruined, come hell or high water. What's interesting about that is, that is kind of a myth. Like, we know that Albert Speer was actually not like that. In fact, he was a pretty ardent Nazi. In fact, he actually was a big architect of the Holocaust, and that sort of idea that he wasn't, the idea that he was kind of a resistor, was not true. He eventually went to Spandau prison, where he was in prison for 20 years, and then was released, and he lived the rest of his life in Germany, giving interviews, about what it was like to be, with Hitler and with the Nazi regime, which he, of course, expressed regrets about. Right, and he later crafted a whole sort of narrative about himself that, after his death in 1981, was sort of revealed to be false. This movie kind of, sort of, I think, recreates the myth, that Speer himself kind of created about himself. I mean, I think a lot of this happened, this kind of reevaluation of Speer happened sort of around the time this movie came out. So it makes sense. But it just makes me wonder about, like, what's so interesting about this movie is how people want to escape, or how people want to get out of the situation. And the real scary thing is not when people want to go down with the ship, but how people can persist, or how people will try to kind of escape responsibility or escape the taint of what's of what we just witnessed, because we all collectively want to just forget about it, as Germany did on some level. Everyone wants to forget about it, right? But again, we're faced with the danger that kind of Tony mentioned, of kind of the short sort of memory, the short-term memory that, a culture has, because it would obviously prefer to forget about these bad things in a way. It's sort of my scatterbrained little last comment, but I just wanted to talk about Speer. It was just something that leapt out to me on my current watching of the film.
That's well said, Connor. And there's a lot of, like you said, like contact points with today and with what's going on throughout the world. Anyways, yes, thank you, Connor. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Tony. I know we're a little short on time, so let's just go around and vote and see what people think, and then we'll move on to our final segment. So go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short. I think that despite my reservations, I think this is a valuable film. It's good that it exists, and I think people should see it. And that to me is enough. I got enough out of it. In addition to those things that I can say yes.
All right, Connor, go ahead.
I would say, Kirk, despite my admiration of the movie, especially in this watch through, I just didn't have a great time. I didn't get the laughs I did.
It's no Book of Henry.
From the first time. It's no Book of Henry. I was struck again by the kind of monotony that I mentioned, which would be better put, as Tony did put it, better than I did. The runtime being kind of an issue, maybe not so much the subject matter, right? Which I don't think you can escape, that it's going to be monotonous when we're talking about the downfall of a regime. It's going to be, I think I would have, cut some elements. I would have focused really on the bunker. I think the secretary character could have been done a little bit better, but obviously she should have been there. I think it was a smart move. Important to make us to raise these questions about culpability and complicity and all that. But overall, I'm going to say no. Again, I have a big respect. It's a soft no, but I'm not sure it's one of the 706.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Anthony.
All right, that was an interesting, sort of stuck in the middle. I think two quick things is, one is I just wanted to say is the actor who plays Gables, is that how you say it in German? What's the
Gables?
I thought was brilliant. I think he actually gives the best performance of the movie. I'll just say that. Two, I think the way Connor was talking towards the end of his previous comment, which was also the fact that more than anything else, Hitler at the sort of World War II offers a sort of grand narrative, right? It's very easy. It's this sort of moral story of Allied, victory, good versus evil. And of course, when we finally get to the evil moment, he takes away the victory that we should have been promised, I think, is another reason for why the sort of fascination endures. And I think it's very interesting to think about.
That Hitler took away the victory by killing himself and not allowing himself to be executed by like an allied.
Yeah, so it's not only a total narrative.
I thought you were talking about we as in like you were okay, never mind.
No, yeah, sorry. No, Connor phrased it better than I did. But yeah, we had this sort of grand narrative, and of course, he ruins it, but that plays into even more of how we think about it, I think. But I'll say yes for Kirk.
There you go.
Yeah.
For the fans.
I'll say also too, unlike Tony and Connor, the secretary thing totally worked for me.
Okay.
Which is, I think, a big selling point. Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to comment on before we moved on is the famous scene where the meme comes from.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like it totally makes sense why it's a meme when you watch it, because like without subtitles, you can totally tell what's happening. Not the specifics, but it just on the faces and like the reactions and the gestures, like the emotional arc of that scene is so like just crystal clear.
Yeah.
Which I think is a testament to just the directing and the performances.
Right. Yeah, it's a great scene.
The three subsequent scenes that are exactly the same, I wasn't into, but that scene is
There's one that's right before it that's almost the same.
Yeah.
I thought that was good.
Talking about the Steiner attack, and I'm like, is this it? And I just not remember it.
I was waiting for it the whole time, but yeah.
I think we needed more Gorman too, because he's a degenerate fucking, like they said, they were talking about him, but he wasn't there. But maybe they couldn't find a good actor for him.
Or
Goering, excuse me, not Borman.
Goering, yeah.
Anyways,
sometimes they would combine into one evil guy called Gorman.
Master Blaster from Beyond.
Actually, Boring is the new enemy in Luigi's Mansion 4. So, folks, there's a little look at Downfall. I think everyone here has said some interesting things. We've engaged in introspection, in a candid look at what we might be buttressing in our own lives, what we should be doing with the horrid, absolutely horrid history of Nazism in the last century. And I think the key point is to not forget. And I think this movie enables us to do that, at least in a flawed way, as Connor pointed out with Speer's legacy. But to not forget, and other movies do it better, of course. This is an intimate look. It's almost an indulgent look, but we do glimpse the madness that is there with Hitler. And, I think if we can remind ourselves, like Tony said, like what am I complicit in today? And just, to not get comfortable. And even like after this election, like Tony said, to, is our goal to actually affect change, or is our goal to not have a raving lunatic on our Twitter feeds, right? And I think that's kind of the idea is, right? We want to be a little better than our forefathers in that regard and how we deal with evil. So thank you for indulging me on this one. The history of the Nazi Party is as brutal as it comes. And I think evil, though a kind of a cliche, is the most accurate word we can. Language fails us, honestly, when you look at the decimation, the extermination. So thank you, folks. Let's go on to our special edition, a prelude to next week's spooky episode. We're doing a haunted nomination here because I have the pleasure of choosing what movie we'll be watching for our Halloween edition of the 706 next week in honor of that Halloween holiday we all love so much. So who wants to go first? Who went least recently? Was it
Tony?
Tony or?
Yeah.
You have an order?
Why don't you know what? Let's have Connor, then Anthony, then me. Let's do that order.
There you go. See, you got to exercise your full power. All right, Connor, go ahead.
Once there was a man whose prison was a chair. The man had a monkey. They made the strangest pair. The monkey became his friend. I don't remember. She climbed inside his head. And now, as fate would have it, one of them is dead. I'm, of course, recommending my favorite horror movie, and one of the few, admittedly few horror movies. Horror movies are definitely a gap in my film knowledge. But this is an old classic, favorite of mine, Monkey Shines by Romero, 1988. Kind of an odd film about where the premise is about a man who gets into a car accident and becomes a quadriplegic. And he is administered to by a specially trained monkey named Ella. And things sort of develop from there. And yeah, you kind of imagine sort of what it's about. Not exactly a scary movie. It's kind of ridiculous. It's kind of a modern B movie or an 80s B movie in a way. But it has remarkable kind of filmic prowess. It's so interesting. It's funny. It's a curious piece of art. There's a certain classicism to the way it tells its story. There's something about it. It really stands up there with the real classic horror movies, maybe in the vein of like Frankenstein, maybe some older movies. But it gets to some kind of deep, kind of psychological, kind of issues. Maybe not in a super nuanced or intellectual way, but in a visceral and moving way, I think. So yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure I know Tony's seen it. I don't remember if Anthony has seen it. I don't know if Kirk, if you.
I have, yeah, I've certainly seen it.
Did we ever watch it together?
You forced me to watch this in the dorm. I guess Anthony was there too. I did sit through this movie. I could not sit through Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. I don't know what that says about that movie, but anyways, Anthony, please suggest the movie.
Wait, we got to ask before. Didn't one of you have a poster of the movie?
Yes, we had the poster in the dorm.
Was it yours, Connor, or was it Tony's?
It was in the common room
next to the Jupiter.
The 706.
I don't know who bought it, but
it was there when we got there, dude. You don't remember?
I think Tony was your poster. It was in the common room of the 706.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I had a tough time with this one, Kirk. I was trying to decide: do I go scary movie type thing? Do I go like something that's more traditionally me, gothic romance type? I don't know, Crimson Peak-esque. And then I kind of decided I'd split the middle and just do a personal favorite horror film. And this is 1973's Don't Look Now. Stars Donald Sutherland, Julie Christie, and it's essentially just this married couple who kind of lost their daughter, and in their grief they're kind of on a work trip in Venice when the father begins to think he sees the daughter in the city. And it's an interesting movie because on one hand you would think it's kind of a simple horror movie, a simple ghost kind of like gothic film, but it plays with things so well. I think it plays with gender dynamics, it plays with the architecture of Venice in a way that's really fascinating. I think you would be interested in the way it shows a sort of decaying city, decaying landscape, and how it plays into our own sort of psyche and how we think about our own sense of being. So I think it's a very fascinating horror movie. it's not necessarily scary per se as it is, how the horrors of our lives, affect us.
Right. Kind of haunting in a way.
Yeah,
Like
very
a
interesting.
haunting
It's based on a Daphne du Maurier story.
Okay.
I just want to say to start, I love that both of you guys start your thing with saying it's not really scary or spooky or
Yeah.
unsettling. You can watch it with your kids. It's fine. I've actually seen both of these, but I'll reserve my
Save it for the rebuttals, Tony.
the witticisms till later. But I was having a really hard time with this. But I thank you guys for leaving me an opening for an actual scary movie. So I'm going to pick
Scary movie.
The Descent. Neil Marshall's 2004, something like that, mid 2000s. Some women go into a cave and they have a great time, and that's all you need to know about The Descent.
Oh, I thought it was called Descent. Oh, it's Descent.
It's
Okay.
called The Decent.
It's not an olfactory movie. Okay. I see. All right.
It's not
We're not ready for
no
those
scratch and
yet.
sniff card distributed with your ticket. You wouldn't want to
All right.
sniff it, I promise.
Okay. Well, okay. Go ahead, Connor. I got to jump and see. I don't remember if I saw Descent. I got to look on IMDb quick at the poster. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay, I've seen The Descent. This was another like freshman year dorm classic that we watched around Halloween. I remember snarking my way through the whole movie. I was showing off that I was like I was not going to be phased. Anyway, I just have a strong memory of like making a lot of jokes during the movie. So this time I'd be forced to hold my tongue and simply watch the movie. I'm sure that would be good for me, but I remember not thinking it was all that special. It was cool, but not all that special. As for Don't Look Now, it's weird. Somehow Don't Look Now is kind of in the air. In another film group, I suggested this, and then someone else suggested it right after that. And I don't know, I've just been like seeing this movie everywhere. Now I really want to watch it. I feel like it's written in the stars that, it would definitely be good to watch it. But so I have nothing to say against it. There's apparently there's a very famous nude scene in it. So that's something for Tony. Maybe for me, I guess I brought it up. So I'm curious. It was controversial at the time. That's all I really know about it, but I'm curious to see it. But of course, Monkey Shines is just the great. Monkey Shines deserves to be enshrined as like a really great kind of cult classic horror movie, and I don't think it gets enough attention.
Yeah, interesting. I was not expecting Connor to throw in Tony's name in that quick moment, of all people, but I think that's right. I think Tony would be really, really into that moment, that scene of Don't Look Now.
Have you seen The Descent, Anthony?
Yeah, actually, Shay put it on not too long ago.
Okay. So you all have seen all the movies, and I don't think I've seen Monkey Shines. I don't even think I've seen The Descent. What do you think of their other two, Anthony? What do you think of Monkey Shines and The Descent?
Well, as for Monkey Shines, I'd say maybe it's best left in the other 706, the physical building where the poster still hangs for the new
If you try to
seniors.
take it down, your hands burn.
Exactly. I think Tony's pick is interesting. I don't know. I can't say like I particularly liked it as I saw it. I'd say it was a fun conversation. It's a conversation piece. So I can't, go against it. And it is a more traditional choice for the sort of the season. I'll go with that. Yeah. So I wouldn't mind watching it again. We're talking about it with you guys, especially for you and Connor, given how you're not usually fans of the genre. Neither am I. Necessarily.
Although, Kirk, I do think Connor said he has not seen Don't Look Now, so we haven't all seen all of each other's. So
My mistake.
if that
I've not
factors in at
seen
all,
Now,
Yeah.
I just wanted to watch
sure
it.
about it.
My mistake. Okay. Tony, what do you got?
Okay, I really like Monkey Shines. I think that'd be a great choice. I think it'd be a really fun one. I do think though that like just Kirk, honestly, like there's a good chance you'll hate it. Honestly, like that, like you know what I mean. Like you have to be willing to deal with a lot of like silliness. I don't know. I don't know. I feel like you might.
We watched it. We watched this together, right?
Oh, I'm
We
sorry.
all watched it in the dorm.
I
yeah.
completely forgot.
I watched it with you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I got all my snark out of the system when I watched it.
Okay, never forget it then. Forget I said anything. It's a great movie. No, I really like Monkey Shines. It'd be fun to do an episode. My thing with Don't Look Now is like I watched it like 3 months ago. I watched it like over the summer, being really excited about it because I've heard about it for like literally years. And I didn't like it at all. I thought it was so boring, and it ended, and I'm like, what? There were like several moments that were clearly supposed to be like deeply unsettling that I thought were just like so dumb. And I know it's like a very acclaimed movie. Like I might just be like wrong. I might just not connect to it for some reason, but just like, I just don't, I genuinely do not want to watch it again. Like I genuinely am not, I'm like really like, just like, God damn. And I know, knowing Kirk, he's probably going to pick it now because of this, because I've said this. I'm really shot myself in the foot here, but I'm just being honest. And I think The Descent is a genuinely scary movie. It's the scariest of the three. That's my pitch also. That's my...
I feel like we disappointed in our selections.
Yeah, I think we may have. Sorry, Kurt.
I don't know. I would be interested to see Don't Look Now until Tony pulled out the trump card there. I don't want to watch it.
I don't watch anything. I'm just saying, like,
That's true. Anytime Tony, wants to win, he just pulls that out.
Clockwork Orange, just like holding his eyes open.
I'd love to see the list of movies I pulled that out for. There's probably like 2 ever.
I haven't. That's what I'm saying. It's a trump card because he never used it. So at least I haven't heard it. Yeah. Let's see. Monkey Shines, I think, would probably be the most fun, and this is supposed to be kind of a fun podcast. So I could
This is the Hitler episode.
No, the next episode, not like we
not
only
the
do uplifting
706,
fun
but,
movies.
okay.
Yeah, no, the next episode. It's kind of like it's that could be a little
Awesome,
be
spooky
interesting.
fun.
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, it's like tough and like you can't decide what frozen meal to eat. Not tough at like you can't decide what 5-star restaurant to go eat at. And yeah, Anthony, your movie sounds obviously like the most acclaimed, of course. I was interested in a little scarier, but man, I think I'm gonna pull a wild card here and give it to Monkey Shine.
Okay.
I was going with the other two. I was like, no way am I going to pick Monkey Shines. And then I was like, you know what? I just want to have fun and talk about this and not be pissed off for one reason or another. And I know I'm going to not enjoy watching it per se. It's going to be okay, but I'm going to give it a break. And it's Halloween and we're just supposed to have some fun. So let's watch Monkey Shines.
I'll take it.
We should all give Kirk like a card to be like new picks. It's like last time when he had to pick the double.
No, I mean the Descent sounds
an
fine.
emergency button to like suspend the podcast until we've reached an agreement, until we bring new options.
I think there's a nostalgia factor here too. I wanna relive that moment when I first laid eyes on that poster. And when I first saw the mad scientist in the classic with the the vials and all that shit, that's like the most cliche thing you'll ever see. But
to be perfectly honest, I completely forgot we all watched it together. I remember watching it with Tony at least much earlier.
The choices were bad when he goes for the movie we've all seen. That's not a good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I know I should have picked something else, like
I
Your
was
Next or
going to
something.
pick Anthony's movie, but you said I don't want to watch it again.
I would have watched it. I'm just saying, like I didn't like it.
We would have got a lot of texts where he's like, "I'm busy. Let's just do this next Halloween."
Next Halloween.
Click. Maybe I would see what I missed the first time, but I just really didn't like it.
Well, there we go, folks. As always, we rise to the occasion and disappoint. Everyone leaves disappointed, and
Oh, this is the
that's
worst.
the story of the 706 podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be with you next week as we play Among Us with AOC and Donald J. Trump. All right, folks. Thank you very much.
I'll have
What
what she's
she's
at.
having.
Yeah.